Okay, John, James Parker, thanks for hanging tight for a few days, mate, while I get situated here in Texas. So just spent a few minutes going over your swing, mate. Looks like a nice range. I'm not sure where you are there, but that looks like a great setup there with the little sand dunes in the background. So here's how I would approach it. First and foremost, let's talk about your setup. Your head is too far over your back foot. Right, that's the first thing that I would pick up on. Okay, we want. Let me pull up a model. Grant Waite's always a good model. Right, so we draw a circle where his head is. Right, a line coming down from his chin, which is going to go straight to the middle of his stance. Right. So what we want is the center of your shoulders in the middle of your stance, and then we want your lower body, your belt buckle, just a smidgen further forward, right? And then what that gives you is a little bit of right tilt in the setup, okay? And because the lower body center, the belt buckle, the center of the hips, is slightly closer to your lead foot, that's going to put a little bit more pressure from a static position. Don't forget, this is set up. That's going to put a little bit more pressure under your lead foot at the start. So let's say 55-60% under your lead foot at the start. Okay. So what I'm seeing is, your head very, very much over your right foot. Okay, and then what that does is that then puts the center of your shoulders over your back foot. So straight away your upper body weight distribution is too far back. Right, put a little circle where your hips are. Now your hips are kind of centered, but because your head's so far back, it's difficult to get your hips slightly closer, slightly more over your lead foot. So everything looks in your setup like it's kind of, you're already hanging back on your right foot, doesn't it? Right. So then if we put a few little dots where your hips are and where your shoulders are, right? And then we start swing. So the first thing that I notice in the takeaway is very much a lack of wrist hinge, right? The club head's very low to the ground. Even kind of to there, it still looks like your left arm and the club are kind of in one line, right? Whereas you look at these pros, there's wrist hinge straight away, right? That club head's moving a lot more than his hands, right? So if we stop him when the shaft is parallel with the ground, right, you can see now he's got that sort of look, and his left and his hands are only just outside of his right thigh, right? So if we stop you when the shaft's parallel with the ground, and we stop you there, well, your hands are well outside your right thigh, right? So the first thing I practice in your takeaway is getting the club head moving more, right? Just getting the club head moving and allowing the club head to move first, and then your hands can follow the club head, then your shoulders can follow your hands, your hips can follow your shoulders, right? That look there is just, it's too wide with very limited wrist cock. And also, because there's limited wrist cock, it's almost like your hands are too far away from your body there. It's also pulling your head even more to the right. Right, so you look at your head, you look at the white cap, it's moving even more outside that red circle. So as we get up to the top, right, or halfway back, we're so far, your head is so far over your right foot, right, that you've got no option but to bring that left heel off the ground, right? Now, I don't mind if you bring your left heel off the ground, but I'd prefer to do it from more of a neutral position, right? Don't forget, if we move our hips or our head to the right, away from the target, which is what you're doing, you've then got to move them excessively left to get into a decent impact position, right? So what ends up happening is you then stamp your left foot down, and you've got very nice dynamic sort of action there with your feet and turning your hips. I love all that, but all that's happening is as you stamp your left foot down, your head's going back into the circle, and at impact, there your head is just too far back, right? Your head is just too far back, keeping too much weight back, right? So if anything, if anything, to start the downswing, his head's moving towards the target, look, right? His head's moving towards the target. And you can see an impact there, right, or just post-impact. Because his head's forward, right, he can then get his hands further forward, and his wrist angles don't break down. So even just post-impact here, he's still got a bent right wrist. Right, I'll do that in red. Right, his right wrist is still bent. Right, his right wrist is still bent. Right, and he keeps that angle. Whereas what you do as you come through is you really release that right wrist, and you can see how you actually throw your right wrist away. Right, so you can see there through impact, just post impact there. Get rid of these lines. You can see how that right wrist has actually, you've thrown the bent right wrist condition away, right? We need to hit the ball with a bent right wrist. Right. There, and then there. And even post impact, look, that right wrist is still kind of bent, right? You can see how you throw that away there. Okay, so obviously that then is going to affect how you strike the ball, your low point control. You're going to find because you're bottoming out too soon, you're going to find you hit fat shots, you're going to find you hit thin shots more than you want to, right? More than you want to. And there it's very evident, look at that right wrist there. Whereas you watch these pros, right, Jordan Spieth's a good example of this. Let me pull up, let me find Jordan Spieth, just bear with me a second. Right, so again, good example there. Right, look where his head is. You see how his head's centered? Head centered, right? And the head stays centered, and now it's the hips that move forward. There you go. So he even moves, so you can see if there's any head movement, he moves his head towards the target, right? He wants to hit the ball, then the ground, right? So you can see head stayed pretty centered, but hips have moved forward, but he's kept his wrist angles. Look at that. This is with a driver, right? This is with a driver. Right. So I would practice that. Right, and you get up to a nice finish, but it's obviously getting there, right? It's obviously getting there. So I would work on that. I would work on that. I would work on getting your head more centered. I would work on getting the club head starting the move. Let me pull up Robert Rock. We want Robert Rock. Right, I would work on the club head starting the move. Look at that. So you see the club head's got an arc to travel on, and so have your hands. The hands have got an arc to travel on. Your hand, the club head is a much bigger arc than your hands. Right? So the club head should be starting the move. You can see there. So when his shaft gets parallel with the ground, his hands are barely outside of his right thigh. Right? You're really wide there. So the simple trick is just get the club head moving more. Right? So that's what I'd practice. And also, again, another very good example. Very centered. Right? Keeps it centered, slides the hips forward, that produces the right tilt. But again, look how he's hitting it. Right? Look how he comes down and hits it, but keeps these wrist angles. Look at that. That's what you want to try and get used to. You want to try and get used to hitting shots, keeping your right wrist bent. Now, you may have to play around with your right wrist, with your right hand placement. It looks very, very strong, right? Meaning, it's wrapped over this way too much, right? So just wrap it over this way a bit more, right? You can see that line between your thumb and your forefinger there, that's pointing way outside of your right shoulder. Just try and get that pointing, instead of it pointing way outside your shoulder, just try and get that pointing up just to the right of your chin, up to your right shoulder. Right, you look at all these pros, you look at how their hands positioned, right, and you look at that little line between their thumb and forefinger. That's just there, look. Nice neutral position, right? So we've always got to try and find root causes, and because at impact we want that, right? Still keeping this right wrist bent, whereas you do that, right? Then you may have to play around with how you place your hand on to see if it helps you, right? And that's a very strong right hand grip for me, right? So I would wrap it over a little bit, wrap your right palm towards the target a little bit more. So try and feel as though the palm of your right hand is facing the target, and then that line in your thumb will just be pointing up to your right shoulder. Okay, so that's what I would work on, and then hit shots where you just stop in there. Just hit shots where you literally just little shots. Just get used to this new movement. You're never going to make a change going full speed and swinging it full length. Right? You've got to shorten it. You've got to go slower. You've got to make it easier for your brain to, for it to sink in with your brain, right? You've got to burn it in, right? You've got to burn these new feelings, these new patterns in, right? So I would just hit little shots just to there, stop there. But when you're here, instead of having this kind of look with your right wrist, we want that kind of look. And what you'll see is the club ends up down here somewhere. Another good example, the legend Mac O'Grady. There you go. right? You want to talk about keeping that right wrist bent, right? And just hit shots doing that. Just hit little shots doing that. Stop there. That's it. Just get used to it. And then if you hit two in a row, boom, good. Now try and hit 5 in a row. Then try and hit 10 in a row. And once you can hit 10 in a row, just little shots doing that, keeping your right wrist bent, right? Then you can go through to a full finish. But you've got to isolate the moves which you're working on. That's very important. That's called isolationism. All right. But that's what I would do, mate. I would practice those few little things in your setup, get your head more centered, get that club head moving first, and then I would hit little shots, just stopping there, keeping your right wrist bent. Okay? And as you go back, let me pull your down the line swing up. As you go back, you see how that left heel comes off the ground, right? Well, that's not going to come off the ground now. Your head is going to be more centered. Because your head's too far to the right, that's what's pulling that left heel off the ground. You'll find that it'll stay on the ground on your backswing, all right? You'll find that it'll stay on the ground on the backswing. Yeah, so you do a good job of loading up under the right foot and then exploding into the left foot. I like all that. Right, and we'll maybe work on, if you want to start sending me some more videos, we'll work on that some more moving forward. But just straight out the gate, because I haven't seen you swing for a while, I would work on those few little things. Head more centered, club head moves first in the takeaway, so you're not so wide, you're not dragging your body to the right, so you can actually tilt your spine to the left, and then as you come down, just hit little shots to start with, pitching wedge, 9-iron, just get used to it. But you've got to get used to hitting shots, keeping your right wrist bent. There, that's the look, not throwing your right wrist away. As you swing back, your left wrist is going to hinge, right? That's what that does there. And as your left wrist hinges, your right wrist bends simultaneously, right? You've got to be aware, and a good way to do this is just by practicing with your eyes closed, right? If you take one of your senses away, right, all your other senses are heightened, right? So your feel is going to become, you're going to be more aware of how it feels in your fingers if you can't see anything, right? How it feels in your wrist. So what I'm saying is, when you go back and the left wrist is cocking here and the right wrist is bending there, right? Just be aware that that right wrist is bending, and then as you come down, keep it bent. Keep it bent, 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 keep it bent. That's where you get it. See how you throw it away there. So you got to keep it bent all the way through impact and post impact. And that's why I said just stop there with little short swings, because you want to feel just post impact that it's still bent, not thrown away. Okay, John? Any questions, mate? Just shoot me an email as normal, and I'll get back to you when I can. Cheers.